Welcome to the new podcast, A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike, hosted by four-time Emmy-nominated producer Frank Pace, with retired New York City firefighter and Vietnam vet Billy O'Connor.
Today's guest, writer, executive producer Chuck Tatham.
My brother Frank. How are you today, pal? How's everything going?
I'm fine. Look at that.
Hey, congratulations, my brother.
Look at that. Lamar's Gamble, A Tale of the AFL-NFL Merger is out.
A bloody fine tale.
A bloody fine tale indeed.
It is a bloody fine tale.
Where can we find it, Billy? If we wanted to look on Amazon, can we find it on Amazon.com?
Is it larger than a bread box?
So it's going to
be on Amazon.
It's going to be on Amazon.
It'll be on Acclaim and wherever fine books.
Acclaimpress.com and a Mick, a Mook, and a Mike.com.
That rings a bell to me. A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike.
Yep.
.com.
And why don't you tell me a little bit about the book?
Well, I mean, it's I wouldn't call it an expose. I would call it an entertaining read about historical time in the NFL and in sports in general. And whenever there's anything involved, multi-billions and billions and billions of dollars, there's going to be some kind of corruption. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, I believe that's correct. And I believe at one point in time, we were going to call it, until we came up with the title, Lamar's Gamble, we were going to call it Murder, Mayhem.
Exactly.
What was the four M's? Mystery, Murder, Mayhem, and the Mob.
And the Mob, yeah.
All the factors are well expounded in the tale of the NFL.
And it's about the owners, and it's a tribute to Lamar Hunt too, and his vision and his determination and the period of the time. I think that's really what resonates with me, because
Yep.
I like history. In the '60s I grew up. I came coming of age, if you will, in the '60s, and it was a tumultuous time.
Yeah. So I think everybody will enjoy the book. That's enough of our self-promotion. But on a Mick, a Mook, and a Mike.com this week, we asked the question on social media: who is the better outfielder, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, or Duke Snider? And we got a wide array of answers from a lot of people.
I think that's an argument that was thrown around in every saloon and every time. Growing up in the '50s, I mean, I grew up in the '50s in New York, and then '50s and '60s, that question hit every ballroom at every time. Who was better, Mantle, Mays, or the Duke?
And who do you think was better?
Well, I'm a Mays guy. Willie Mays was the best I ever saw. But I got to tell you, from a different perspective, I was at a ball game with my old bookmaker, who was an old Jew. His name was Irving Fruitman. And everybody, of course, called him Fruity. And Fruity was an old school bookmaker. He was the kind of guy, before computers, obviously, his whole house looked like the Collier brothers. It was all newspapers stacked all over the place from old scores. And this guy watched sports maybe the only way a bookmaker would watch sports. Like he watched every play because he had money on every game. And I asked him one day, we were at a ball game and a Met game. And I said to him, I was 35, 36, and Fruity was 82. And I said, who's the greatest ball player you ever saw? He said, Joe DiMaggio. And I said, no, wait, think about it for a second. I mean, don't give me an off the cuff. He's Joe DiMaggio. I said, he said, Joe DiMaggio. I said, well, how much better could he have been than Mays? Mays to me was the greatest ball player that ever lived. He did it all. He said, read my lips. Joe DiMaggio. Now, and that bothered me that I never got to see DiMaggio play, because I knew he knew his shit,
Well, growing up, I thought Mickey Mantle was the sun rose and set on Mickey Mantle. As I got later in life, within the last 10 years or so, I've come to realize that Willie Mays was a better baseball player than Mickey Mantle. And you can't do all of those if he had good knees, if he had, was healthy, if he wasn't a drunk. And again, I let a lot of my personal experiences with Mickey Mantle factor into Willie Mays becoming better than Mickey Mantle.
Yeah.
And I also got to know Duke Snider, who was a sweetheart.
A really nice guy.
Oh, he was the best. And he was overlooked in that, because back in the 50s or 60s, you could make the argument that Duke was the best.
Well, this is a stat that I had read and always resonated with me. And I'm sure most people don't know this, but in that decade between 1950 and 1960, Duke Snider hit more home runs than anybody in baseball.
Yep.
In that 10 years.
Yep.
I mean, granted, Mays was in the Army for 2 years and Mantle got hurt, but he had more home runs in those 10 years.
Yep.
And he's largely forgotten.
Well, also, you had those three guys were just New Yorkers, and that was the question that was asked. But, somebody could have said Hank Aaron, or somebody could have said Roberto Clemente.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to, with all due reference to Boston fans, Ted Williams was every bit the equal of the hitter of those guys, and maybe a superior hitter than those guys, but he wasn't the defensive player, and he didn't have the arm that those five guys had. So that's why I don't think Ted Williams, the greatest hitter, maybe you can make the argument for Ted Williams, but the greatest ball player, I think would come, or greatest outfielder in those times, and I'm maybe missing a lot of people, but I think Mantle, Mays, Snider, Aaron, and Clemente really.
And you made an argument for Musial as well. I mean,
yes, but
again,
I'm not talking about pure hitters, and I'm not talking about
overall baseball.
I'm talking about overall baseball players. They had the five tools, and as Rod Carew would say, they also had the sixth because they had the head for it.
Yeah,
that's the sixth and most important.
I heard many sportscasters, well, at least a couple anyway, had talked about Mays, and everybody, credits Mays with just this great natural ability, could do it all, could run, could hit, could do it all. But many of them talked about he was such a student of the game that they don't really give him credit for. Like Mays did his homework.
And Mays was also a showman. So he would wear his hat half a size smaller so it could fly off instead of.
I always remember him turning second base and that hat would come off on his way to third. Always.
Yep.
And whether he was too small or too large, and of course the basket catch.
Yep.
I got a question.
Before we get to your question, I want to remind everybody that we have Chuck Tatham coming up, executive producer on Modern Family,
Development, Modern Family.
Yeah, Modern Family and Arrested Development, and a lot more. So he's going to be a great guest. So Derek, what's your question?
Maybe you talked about this on a previous episode, but Rod Carew, who does he say is the guy, the number one?
I think Willie.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I think Rod would say Willie.
I asked Orlando Cepeda, and I asked him. I said, you batted behind Maris, you batted behind Willie. I said, who's the greatest you ever saw? You know what he told me? Just a simple thing. He said, all I can tell you is Willie came to play every day.
Yeah, Mantle didn't come to play every day.
That's for sure. I saw Mantle interview, and they said, did you try and hit home runs? He said, every single time up. He says, every single time up. He says, and Casey used to get on him because he wouldn't hit behind the runner. He says, I get up to smash that ball every time up. Yeah.
Yep. So before we go to Chuck, this day in history, June 29th, 1966.
66. Let's see. 66. So let's see. Man got on the moon in 67?
No, 69.
69? No, 69. You're right. I was on my way to Vietnam. So 66.
There's your hint. Vietnam.
Did we first get involved with Vietnam?
No, we were involved in. Did we just write a book?
Yeah, well, way before that. We got involved with Vietnam under Truman.
Yeah, so it had to do with Vietnam. Hanoi bombing.
We started bombing Hanoi in 66?
On June 29th, 1966.
Wow.
And that was probably the end of Lyndon Johnson, wasn't it? Wasn't that? Didn't you say McNamara gave him that bad advice to go in and bomb Hanoi? And
yeah, well, all the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they kept telling LBJ that they were going to be able to end the war, it will escalate, and Nixon got elected basically on the premise that he was going to get us out of Vietnam. He had a plan right here in his pocket. It's like the healthcare plan that the Republicans are pushing. It's right here in the pocket. But of course, we ended up escalating. We went to Cambodia. We were bombing Laos. that war is such a. It's so ridiculous. I mean, to think that you could, and we're doing the same thing now when we went into Afghanistan. It's the same
20
thing.
years ago.
You're fighting a war that's 12, 14,000 miles away, and you had the idea that we could policemen of the whole world. We could solve everybody's problems. We can't solve our own problems. You know?
Well, we could have if we spent the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars we spent on Afghanistan and put them into our own country. And we could have done it at a time, not like now, when we could do something across aisles.
Yeah, right. This Congress couldn't pass a fart through Gaza, or Gaza, or Gaza, for that matter. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, we can't agree on anything.
Well, politically, we can't agree on anything because we're told who to agree on politically.
And that's another thing. Every time you see a news, can't they just give us the news? Do we got to bring out 3 talking heads to tell us what we just saw? So Frank says today we started the bombing in Illinois. Let's bring our 3 experts out to find out what exactly did he mean by that when he said the bombing in Illinois in 69. I mean,
they said if the bomb lands on you, you're going to die.
Without a doubt.
With that, let's go to Chuck Tatham.
Yeah, let's bring him on. I'm dying to talk to him.
He'll be a good guy for us to get.
A legitimate writer.
Derek?
All right, let's get Chuck on.
Hey, there he is.
Hey.
How are you doing, my friend?
Very well, Frank. Hey, you're looking well. You're looking younger than ever.
Yeah, well, that'll tell you how bad I used to look.
You better adjust those glasses, pal.
Meet my partner, Billy O'Connor.
Hey, Chuck, nice to meet you, brother.
And my other partner, Derek Harris.
Good to see you.
Hello,
Good to see you. Good to hear you.
So we should start right away with the playoffs, the hockey playoffs, because you're a big hockey fan. How are you looking forward to the Canadiens in Tampa Bay? Who are you rooting for, by the way?
Well, let me just adjust my chair. Okay. I was so worried about the Leafs. And it's 3-1 for the Leafs, so I was done. I was focusing on baseball. But ever since then, I think I objectively, I think we can beat anybody if we play our system, and Carey plays like he's out of his mind. Tampa Bay is going to be obviously the toughest team. If Kucherov is healthy, the guy's a machine. But we haven't been there since '93. We haven't won it since '93. So the guys play a little bit like they're playing with house money. It's crazy, and I'm delighted. It is another reason to continue living, Frank.
Playing with house money is something Billy, as a gambler, never did.
No. But playing with house money in hockey, the reference would be play loose, right? Play loose, play like you got nothing to lose.
They got nothing to lose. Tampa Bay won it last year. They're going in against Goliath, and Carey Price. He reminds me of Marty Brodeur, who used to say, the minute he lets in a goal, he just forgets about it. And you can tell that Carey, he just has a mindset that's extraordinary. And if we get the lead, we clog the neutral zone, and it's some people would say it's not the most interesting hockey in the world, but for me, if we win another cup,
it'll be interesting hockey. Nobody will remember whether it was interesting or not.
Exactly.
How was the last 10 minutes for you of that Islanders game with clinging to a 1-0 lead?
Of the last game of the Montreal series?
With the Islanders, yeah. Not the Islanders. Yeah.
Vegas. Yeah. I don't know. It was I couldn't sit down. And then, of course, they sort of dominated in overtime. It was one of those things where I was like, if we get one shot, even if we get one shot, and we got one shot, we won. So
that's great. That's great.
Did you play hockey when you were a kid?
Yes, still do.
Well, you're from Canada. We should establish the fact that you're from Canada, correct? Guelph?
Born in Listowel, Ontario, about an hour and a half north and west of
I love the way about.
Yeah, about. And then raised in Guelph, Ontario. Guelph is a hotbed of NHL officials over the years. McCreary, Van Helleman. You'd think it was a more officious town, but they're it's like the old way. Guelph's a lovely spot. Moved down here in 1991. I notified the INS about 3 weeks ago.
And
I'm kidding.
What made you move down here?
My brother and I were writing partners. We were both in advertising in Toronto. We were both bored out of our minds, and we sent a couple of sample scripts to a show called Maniac Mansion. And Maniac Mansion was directed by Eugene Levy. The head writer was Marty Short's brother, Mike Short. Joe Flaherty starred in the show. And Mike Short said to us, "You guys, you got to get out of here." And we weren't sure how to interpret that. And what he meant was, there's just not enough going on in Toronto. You got to go to LA. So I drove to Detroit with everything I owned, and the guy leaned in and said, "Where are you headed?" I said, "Florida." And he said, "With hockey equipment and a desktop computer?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Get going." So that was 91. And then the first gig was my brother and I got was Full House. And then my brother came to his senses, moved back to Canada, and I stayed here.
Okay, so let me ask you, what did you do between 91 when you got here and 95 when you landed at Full House gig?
The first gig was a sketch show, TV show. I don't think it ever aired, but it was for a producer named Pierre Cossette. Pierre Cossette was a big Broadway producer and also Canadian, and a lovely man. And that sort of occupied the first year into 92. And 92 is when we started on Full House. And Full House was probably season 4 or 5. It was a top 10 show. It was on, TGIF. I mean, I don't remember the numbers. It was like 30 million people every week. We were very lucky. I remember early on, I couldn't tell, because Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen played Michelle. And early on, I couldn't tell which one was Mary-Kate and which one was Ashley. So I asked one of the showrunners, "How can you tell the difference?" And he said, "Well, first you have to give a shit."
Terrific.
At that point, I thought, "Well, this is a very healthy disrespect to what's going on." I mean, the show was adored, and of course, the girls, now women, who played Mary-Kate were extraordinary, as was everybody. And I got to know Bob and Dave and John and the whole, everybody was great. It was an extraordinary way to be sort of welcomed into Hollywood.
Wow.
I love the leap. I mean, this is similar to your thing. You're leaping from advertising to show business.
I left from advertising to show business.
Leap.
That's correct.
I don't know. Did I know that? My father was a newspaper guy. And he said, when I got out of school, he said, "You got to learn how to write with a clock. You got to learn." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, you can spend 5 years writing a novel and get nothing. If you go to a radio station or a newspaper or an ad agency, there's going to be somebody hounding you all day, and you're going to be writing as fast as you can. And it was extraordinary advice from.
That's great. That's amazing advice, and I never heard that before. But when you say a newspaper guy, he had a column, or he was a reporter, or what was? I mean, he had a deadline, obviously, but what was his?
Interestingly, Billy, his father, C.O. Tatham, owned and operated numerous newspapers in Canada, and my dad bought one of the newspapers from the Listowel Banner, and he was the editor and publisher of the paper. So he wrote for the paper, he edited the paper, he published the paper, and he's from Woodstock, Ontario, about an hour down the road. Interesting story about my grandfather, C.O. Tatham. The only pool in Woodstock in the 1930s. So it turned into the city's pool. And it was 60 by 40, so it was roughly the size of the LA Coliseum. And there was no filtration system, but the entire city would swim in it every week. And you'd think, okay, there's no filtration system. You're familiar with tetanus. You're familiar with, what they would do. This was the interesting thing. There was apparently a very large plug in the bottom of the pool, not unlike.
Come on.
I'm not kidding. They would pull the plug Sunday night. But Monday, an hour or two later, the thing was empty, and all 7 or 8 neighbors would run their hoses into the pool, and it would be full again by Tuesday, and then they do it again. So that was
the plug.
The Woodstock, Ontario, Charles Oswald Tatham, Grandpa, and I remember on more than one occasion, I didn't have a swimsuit or anything. Sort of as a 4-year-old swimming through everyone in southwestern Ontario in my underwear, going, Is this the Ganges? What the hell is going on?
That's fantastic.
So that reminds me of something. Billy always says all writing is rewriting, but I defer, because I remember what T.J. Simers said, who's the great LA Times writer. He said, there is no rewriting in my business. We just write it and we go to deadline and it goes to press.
Oh, absolutely. I remember there's a lovely man named Bob Ebel who worked at the agency. I was actually in Chicago for a while at an agency. Every hour on the hour, suspenders, proud Michigan State Spartan, he would lean into my office and go, "Where's my scripts?" And I'd say, "Bob, I'm working on as many clients as I possibly can." And at the time, and I don't want to brag, we were doing Montgomery Ward commercials. And as I say, at the risk of bragging, I was in charge of writing a lot of the advertising when they went bankrupt.
That's the way to go. But I love that, the idea of writing to a deadline. That's an amazing advice. You're talking about getting interrupted. There's a famous, anecdote about H.L. Mencken. And supposedly he was a liberal guy, and he'd go to the Republican convention, and he'd have to get his copy out with a typewriter. And while they were heckling him in the middle of the convention, he would write his column and not have to re-edit a word of it. Which is
that is extraordinary talent, because to be able to, I can't even believe people used to do it with a typewriter.
Yeah, me either.
How did we do it? Even if left to your own devices, every third word at this point we're altering and editing. It was
55 gallon drums of white out.
And
yeah,
they would have to then call the story in after they wrote it.
Oh, do it over the phone.
Yeah.
It's
remarkable. Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, now I don't really even type much, because in the writer's room, of course, there is a writer's assistant. So 95% of my life is just blabbity and a gentle soul in the corner typing it down. It's always funny. There's when you say something in the room that you think is funny, and you don't get much of a response, of course, there's no typing. And I think that's going to be the name of my autobiography. I never heard typing, because I'll pick something, I'll look at the writer's assistant. The writer's assistant will go, "Really? Really?" And
Chuck, let me ask you a question. When did the writer's assistant first enter into the room? Because when we were on Head of the Class, the youngest writer in the room was on book, which means that he was writing the notes down.
Okay, yeah, I don't know exactly when it happened. The big thing for me, Frank, was the monitors.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when you would be pitching in the room with the other writers, and you didn't really know what was going on. Like the writer's assistant was typing, but you didn't really know what was going on. And then somebody said, "Let's put up monitors so we have a clue." And that was a bit of a game changer. It made it harder on the writer's assistant, because now you're seeing everything literally as they're typing, and you'd say things like obnoxious things like too many T's in giraffe, stuff like that. but I remember, you just reminded me of something, Frank. Coming back from the run through, the writer's assistant's got to be ready, because the run through, and I'm sort of jumping all over the place. The run through is the rehearsal, as we all know. You go to the stage, you see the actors do it. You come back, and based on what happened at the run through, you rewrite it. And I came back, Suddenly Susan, show where we met at Warner Brothers, wonderful people, run by Gary Donzig and Steve Peterman, and everyone has notations in their script after a run through. The check mark obviously means the joke worked. X means not so much. It's squiggle, etc. And Steve Peterman, he stepped out of the room after run through, and I looked at his script, and his script occasionally said JCT in the column, and I couldn't understand what that was code for. And he came back, and I said, "What is JCT?" He said, "That means just check tape. You were the only one laughing because you want to go home."
I thought I was going to say joke to come.
No. JCT, but JCT was just because I would like be doing run-throughs with my car keys in my hands, going, "Please be funny. I don't want to be here tonight," And I'd laugh at stage directions. I'd laugh at people moving chairs, But Steve and Gary, as you know, were my great mentors of mine. That was my third show. I went Full House, Living Single, and then Suddenly
And
Susan.
you worked with Yvette Lee Bowser on Suddenly Susan, and Yvette Lee Bowser is probably one of the 2 or 3 best executive producers I've ever worked with, because she came with a point of view, and she would listen to the room. But if you can change her mind, great. But she was the final decision maker. She was really good at making decisions.
Yeah, she was good at making decisions. She had to your point, she had a great vision. And it's, I've said to people, if the dartboard is moving, it's really, really hard to hit it. But if the showrunner sort of just puts the dartboard on the wall and says, we got to hit this thing, it just makes life easier. It just makes it, and it makes, when you define characters properly, as I tell young writers, if the character is properly defined, it makes the writing easier. It's hard to define the character. But when George Wendt walks in, on Cheers, and Woody says, "Hey, Norm, do you want a beer?" All George Wendt had to do was stare into shrug and get a laugh. You knew the character desperately wanted a beer, and Yvette was great at defining the characters and defining what the show was, and it just made that job a joy.
And originally, and I don't want to get on a political rant of political correctness, but Living Single was Friends before Friends.
Yeah.
And if the television environment was what it is today, Living Single should have been Friends, because Living Singles was every bit as good as Friends. It was actually better for me because Yvette told stories about real life, and I don't think Friends was so much about real life as just contrived situations that white people liked, and Yvette wrote for all people.
She was a great defender and protector of the show. The thing is, pardon me, how many people were watching the show when it was canceled? Was it 20 million? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This was a different time, obviously. This was 25 years ago.
Today, you'd be a star. You'd be the top show on television.
Yeah, and I don't even remember what Fox put in instead of Living Single, but it was a phenomenon. I made great friends there, and I remember my buddy Ed Evans and we worked on the show, and we were told everybody out, because this was the Warner Brothers Ranch, and they were shooting a movie called Grosse Pointe Blank on the Warner Brothers Ranch with John Cusack. And we were told one day at Living Single, everyone must leave the building, get in your cars and get the hell off the... What? We're blowing up the little building across from your building. And I guess it's a scene in the movie where someone puts a grenade into a microwave oven and it blows up. So everybody gets in their cars and leaves. And I look at Ed and I said, it'd be cool to see this building blow up. He said, yeah, it'd be really cool. So we snuck up to the top of our building and we looked out. We were probably, I would say, 150 yards from the building they were going to blow up. And we were looking through these little tiny upper windows. Ed's a tall guy, taller than I am, but we were both up there, and we had these little windows, and we were looking out, and we saw them bring out all these protective shields, and everyone was actually wearing helmets and stuff. And I looked at Ed, and I said, should we open these windows maybe? because maybe there'll be some sort of... And he said, yeah, so we opened them. They blew up this building. The world's hottest wind came in. If we hadn't opened those windows, it would have blown out. It was like we were at Los Alamos, and we were sitting there going, "We're going to die. We're going to die." A scene from Point Blank, Grosse Pointe Blank, and it was ridiculous. And so I still remember looking over at Ed, sort of covered in soot and glass, going, "Well, this is Hollywood, man. This is really cool. We almost died, but it was great." So I still haven't seen the film because I think there's no way the film can compare to what we saw.
Like you said, Los Alamos all over again, right?
It really was.
Like Oppenheimer.
We should have had the goggles. We should have. It was.
I want to ask you a question as a total, outsider to the television business. And before I do, I just want to mention to our audience that the amount of successful programs that Chuck has been involved with, Arrested Development, How I Met Your Mother, Modern Family. I mean, this guy's been around the block. But you mentioned before about going into a writer's room, and I've never been in a writer's room. So nobody's really coming in with script. I mean, what you're doing is you're just talking, and one person's clerk stenographer or court stenographer?
It's a bit like that, Billy, in that the first thing we do as a staff is we sit around and we figure out what the episode's going to be about. We're going to figure out the outline of whatever the episode is. And we're talking, and the writer's assistant is typing in the corner. Then one person is generally selected. It's either their turn to write the script or they pitched the idea and they go off for a week and they write it. Then they bring it back and the room rips it apart and punches
So
it
everybody in the room reads it first, and then they get a sense of what's going on, and then they.
And you come in with notes.
If you're lucky, if you're not lucky, and if your script sucks, you go back for a second rewrite and maybe a third rewrite before they show it to the room.
The page one rewrite is a biggie. The process is you have to have extraordinarily thick skin because you're going off to write the script, and then you're coming back and sort of presenting it to the room, saying, "Here's what I did with the outline."
Right.
And you take the script. Everyone takes the script home. The next day they come in with notes, and you just have at it for about 2 or 3 days.
So it's brainstorming, pretty much. It's like it's
brainstorming, and then in the process of writing the script, sometimes the writer will see problems with the outline and try and fix them. And anyway, once the staff has gotten through it once or twice, then we have the table to read with the cast. The cast reads it. We hear what works and what doesn't. Then we rewrite it that night. We see it on its feet the next day to run through. We rewrite it again. The next day we see it on its feet again for run through. We rewrite it again. And then hopefully by Thursday we block it. And then Friday night in front of an audience, if it's a multicam.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to say. If it's a multicam, if it's a single cam, how is the writing process different?
The writing process, Frank,
like Modern Family was a single camera, so it was like shooting with a movie. A multiple camera is like shooting a play. It's
like shooting
4 cameras, right?
Yeah, and the single cam stuff does not have a live audience, and the 2 biggest single cams I've been on were Arrested Development and Modern Family. You write the hell out of those things, and then you just give them to the actors and shoot them over the course of a week. And while they're shooting, 1 or 2 writers is on set with the director and the cast, but everyone else is writing the next one back at the office.
And with Modern Family or Arrested Development, were you on the set if you wrote the script?
Yes. If you wrote the script on Modern Family, you're on the set. Now, Arrested Development, as we all know, and Mitch Hurwitz, but I'm going to take a second to just say Mitch Hurwitz is an extraordinary genius. He created Arrested Development. He sent me the pilot, which I read. He said, "Can you help me with this? Or throw in a joke or two." I couldn't believe how extraordinary this was. This was maybe the finest, funniest piece of writing that I'd ever seen. I couldn't believe the vision. I couldn't believe the density of the comedy. The characters were hilarious. I'd never seen anything like this before. So in my own small fashion, I think I helped. I think I gave them a joke or something. But the process on that show was that we sort of kind of wrote it right up until we had to shoot it. Those were long, and I'm not going to exaggerate. Those were 70 to 80-hour weeks where you worked on weekends and you worked right up until Monday morning. And gave the actors the script. Modern Family would be table read, rewrite, and then off to the races. No run-throughs. Just start shooting it after a couple of rewrites. The casts, by the way, it goes without saying. I can't. If someone says, "What's the biggest surprise in Hollywood?" I wasn't sure I fully respected acting until I got here. I can't believe how talented these people are. And the people that I've worked with, from Full House all the way to I'm on a show now called United States of Al on CBS. Everything in between. I mean, you can give people. I worked with a gentleman named Jason Segel on How I Met Your Mother. You could rewrite a page for Jason on the spot and give it to him. He'd glance at it and go, "Got it," and just it's when I think of Will Arnett, when I think of Neil Patrick Harris, when I think of Ty Burrell, I've been.
There are no accidents. These guys got the gear.
Oh yeah, just all gifted, all very generous, because they will say, if Neil Patrick Harris says, you know what might be a little funnier? You listen. You know, when Ty Burrell, you know, when Ed O'Neill brings the wealth of, you know, you know, when Ed says something, everybody listens. Ed was great because Ed was a consummate professional and an extraordinarily nice man, but he loved going quickly. He didn't like, you know, a lot of setups and a lot of you know, shooting a scene over and over. And he'd say, "Are we done with Ed? We haven't shot it yet." Oh, okay. Ed, you haven't been in, you haven't even been into hair and makeup yet. Oh, okay.
I love Ed. I worked with Ed on the first movie I ever did. It was called "The Winner Never Quits."
Really?
Yeah, "Winner Never Quits" was the Pete Gray story. Pete Gray was a one-armed outfielder with the St. Louis Browns, and he played Keith Carradine's, Pete Gray's brother, who had been wanting to be a boxer, and then he was brain dead. Not brain dead, but he was knocked out, and when he woke up, he was a little bit off.
Oh,
so
wow.
Ed played that little bit of off character, and he was a great guy. And then when we got to see him again when I was doing Daddy Dearest with Don Rickles, he was doing Married with Children.
Yeah.
And he would always be they would always be at the same bar that we went to by 9 o'clock because we wanted to be out and Ed wanted to be out. So they were always at the bar by 9 o'clock.
I love actors that want to get out of there. I mean, when you're as good as those guys are, they're allowed to go as fast as they want because Ed always knew what he was doing. He was always extraordinary. And I'm reminded of a story. Years ago, we went to a play in New York with the late, great Brian Dennehy called, it was Eugene O'Neill, Desire Under the Elms. And it's a tour de force for Brian Dennehy. And we were supposed to meet some friends at a bar a couple doors down later. So the play ended, and we wanted to beat the crush. We literally ran from our seats down the street and into the bar, and Brian Dennehy was there with a scotch. Is there a tunnel?
There's a pro, a real pro.
That was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and I'm so happy for Ed. He had a 10-year run in Married with Children and another 10-year run in Modern Family.
You know,
I want to be adopted by Ed O'Neill.
Oh yeah.
I was tending bar in a joint in Mayapack on a Monday night, and I'm tending bar, and all these kids are going, "Hey Al, give me a drink. Hey Al, give me a drink." And I kept saying, "What's with this Al shit? You know, my name is Billy. What's with the Al? You look like Al Bundy. You look like Al Bundy." You know? And everybody was telling me I look like Ed O'Neill, so I did a little research. It turns out that he was born in Cork City.
Island?
He was born in Ireland. Yeah, he was born in the same
place as Billy was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's
I don't know what my mom was doing back then. I don't know.
She wasn't doing Ed's father, I guarantee you that.
I don't know. I could be related, Frank. You never know.
When you were at that bar in Mayapack, is that where you served Roger Bear?
Rod Gilbert.
Roger Bear.
Did you serve Roger Bear?
Rod Gilbert used to come into my restaurant. I had a restaurant up in Mayapack, and it was right near Mayapack Country Club, which is right outside New York. It's about 40 miles outside New York, you know. And he used to come into my joint all the time. Terrific guy, very nice guy.
Oh.
So I just mentioned to Frank. I said, "Yeah, Roger Bear used to come into my house." He goes,
You didn't say that.
"Who the hell is Roger the Bear?"
Right.
I said, "Roger Bear." He goes, "Roger the Bear." I said, "No, Roger Bear."
Yeah.
But
Roger Bear, number 7.
Yep. Once we figured that out, we were off to the races.
Yeah. You all of a sudden you knew Vic Hadfield and Jean Rattel, the other guys on his line.
Yep.
You know, so
there's a man who knows his hockey.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, years ago, Mitch Hurwitz, speaking of Mitch Hurwitz, he said, "I'm producing a show with Michael J. Fox, and you want to fly out to his place?" It was actually in Martha's Vineyard. And it was a show about a retired hockey player. And I only mention it because Michael J. Fox had never met me, and Michael is a big hockey fan. And in our first conversation, it was very funny. He was gently testing me to see if I knew what the hell I was talking about. You know, Gary Doak was a good defenseman for the Bruins, he sort of said. And I said, "Yeah, he was no Dallas Smith." And then Michael J. Fox says, "Yeah, but Eddie Westfall is pretty good." I said, "Yeah, Johnny McKenzie." And then I could tell he was just new. I had an encyclopedic knowledge of hockey. I said, "I might be the shittiest writer in the world, but I know my hockey, Michael."
Hey, let me ask you a question, Chuck. Derek, can you get that picture up? That hockey picture up? I think we found a hockey picture of you. That's the wrong. Oh, well, I think we found a hockey picture
Those
of you.
are two hockey pucks.
Those are two hockey pucks. No, that's Chuck. That's Chuck.
Oh,
There it is.
There it is.
There he is. Can you see
Okay.
that? Can you see that, Chuck?
I can. Look at that guy.
What was that all about?
That was a celebrity hockey game where they apparently ran out of celebrities. and it was the night before the Kings played the Ducks at Dodger Stadium. So they said, let's have two teams get out there and have fun, purple versus gold, and with Luc Robitaille, lots of and TV and film stars and writers and people who played hockey. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, to play hockey in Dodger Stadium and Nelson Emerson was there. I remember when I got there, they said, what sweater do you want? What team? I said, I think I'm on gold. Just give me the biggest one you got, because I'm a fairly big guy. And they sort of threw me a sweater and I put it on. And then Rob Blake, the Hall of Famer, comes. I said, oh my God, we're playing with Rob Blake. This is pretty cool. And he starts looking at the sweaters and he says, where's number 4? And I went, oh my God, I'm wearing a sweater. This is like putting on 99 and dressing bucks. And so I said, he said, he was very gracious, very gracious. He said, no, I don't care. You did wear whatever you want. So we went out, and in hockey, when you look over your defensive partner, and sometimes you look over and make sure everything's okay when you're going to take off, like when you're going to leave your position with the puck. And I was out there with my partner was Nelson Emerson, who was a great NHL player for St. Louis and the Kings. And I looked, and there was a lot of amateurs mixing up with the pros, and the pros were being very gentle and very charitable and not shooting. They were always passing to guys like me to see if we could score. Anyway, I got the puck, and instinctively I looked over at Nelson, and I said, and I looked at him like, "Can I take off?" And he looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think I got it."
Well,
yeah, you were in the NHL. Yeah, you got it.
Well, we have a photo of a fella who was in goal against some of your shots. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So if no, that's not it, but we'll get it. There it is.
Oh, okay.
There's the goalkeeper.
Terry Sawchuk. Yes, that's a guy who proudly played without a mask, and famously he was a Hall of Famer, obviously. In 1967, when the Toronto Maple the NHL expanded from 6 teams to 12, the Toronto Maple Leafs did not protect Terry Sawchuk. Their owner, Harold Ballard, said, he's now a... And Sawchuk I think he was the first person picked. He wound up in the Hall of Fame. And of course, 67.
They won the Stanley Cup, correct?
They won, that was their last cup. And I mentioned that because at this time, I don't know if you guys know this, I'm working on a documentary about Harold Ballard, the notorious owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs from 71 to his death in 1990. We sold that to the CBC. And I just was up in Toronto interviewing Darryl Sittler, Lanny McDonald, Tiger Williams, Rick Five, Don Cherry, and that was very, very. I mean, I'm a Montreal fan, but I was raised near Toronto, so all that Toronto lore from guys like Terry Sawchuk has sort of been absorbed into my system.
Wow, that's great.
That's amazing pick. That's an amazing pick. A hockey player, hockey goalie without a mask, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So now you're at United States of Al, and you're relocated with another creative genius, Chuck Lorre, who you worked with on How I Met My Mother.
I did not.
Oh,
no,
you didn't?
I've never worked with Chuck.
But he must have known you from How You Met Your Mother.
How I Met Your Mother was Craig Thomas and
okay,
and
correct.
And
how did
Chuck,
you pass muster with Chuck?
I have no idea, Frank. I can't imagine. I've obviously deceived him somehow. He's a lovely man who I met in a job interview for about half an hour, and all I know that he is prodigious, extraordinarily successful, and his taste is extraordinary. We just watched the entire third season of Kaminsky Method. Brilliant. And it's funny though, if I were to say something, if I were to suggest something to him about a story or something, it would feel like it would feel a little bit like giving like Mickey Mantle batting tips, like he just knows the craft so well, and he's so successful at it that I will quietly defer to anything Chuck Lorre says. And to avoid confusion, I think on the show they're calling me either CT, Tatham, or Fat Ass.
So they got you pegged immediately.
Well, yeah, I say I get a lot of fat ass at home, so if they want to call me that at work, I'm easy. It's very hard to spend 30 years in a writer's chair and not have a fat ass. I mean, in my defense, you walk in the morning, somebody slides a menu under your nose, you circle something. At 1 o'clock, they slide the lunch in front of you. At 3 o'clock, they slide another menu. 6 o'clock, they slide another dinner in front of you. You take a handful of nitro and keep going.
Not for the last year and a half, though.
No.
How's you've been Zooming?
I've been Zooming. I worked on a show called Central Park, which is an animated show for Apple TV Plus, and that was kind of easy, as it were, because scripts would sort of come to me and outlines, and I'd work on them. I'm executive producing a show in Canada that called Children Ruin Everything. It's on CTV next fall in Canada. My boys were like, "Did you come up with the title?" I said, "No, I did not."
That title writes itself.
Exactly. The title and the creator of the show is a guy named Kurt Smeaton. I think his kids are like 9 and 7, and the title makes sense because when your kids are 9 and 7, children ruin everything.
Yeah, there's an old adage that says, like, when you kill your mother, it's matricide. You kill your father, it's patricide. You kill your children, it's justified.
Yeah. Well, it gave me an opportunity during the pandemic to go see my mom. My mom's 90. She's in long-term care in Guelph, Ontario, and as an essential caregiver, because I was thought of as an essential caregiver in that when I saw her, it would help her mental health. The pandemic, I was a lucky guy. The pandemic's obviously just a terrible, awful thing, but it meant that I could go see her in Guelph because I'm Canadian. I have my passport and I'm allowed to go back and forth. And it really afforded me a chance to see a lot of my mom, who I haven't seen over much because I've been trapped in LA for the last 28 years or whatever. But Toronto, when I was there last month, Toronto's still closed. There's nothing going on.
Really?
I mean, I'm not making this up. I was at the King Edward Hotel, and I said, "Can I have?" Because they said we can't do housekeeping very often because there's nobody in the hotel. And I called down and I said, "Can I have housekeeping?" They said, "She's sick." And I said, "Well, there's the one housekeeper for a hotel with 600 rooms because there were only about 5 guests." And I said, "Will she rally tomorrow? Because I need towels." But the streets of Toronto are the bars, the restaurants, I know for a fact the strip clubs are quite closed.
Yeah.
No matter how you work the door, it just wouldn't budge. I mean, we just don't have people vaccinated yet. So.
Yeah, my friend Georgi Mihailovic plays center midfield for the Montreal Impact of the MLS, and he's playing his home games in Fort Lauderdale because they can't even get into the country and they can't get other teams in the country, so they're playing their home games in Fort Lauderdale, like the Toronto team in baseball.
The Jays are in Buffalo.
Yeah, the Jays are in Buffalo after having spent throughout May in Florida because they had to want to wait until the weather got better in Buffalo.
Yeah,
Canada hasn't been hit as hard as the United States, has it? I mean, why is it still closed up?
The United States makes their own, from what I got, the United States makes their own vaccine. Canada doesn't. Canada's had difficulty producing the vaccine. So we're beholden to supplies that Canada can procure, and it's been very difficult.
Wow.
It's been very, very difficult. But I was just in Buffalo because if you fly into Canada, this rule changes actually next week. If you fly into Canada, you have to go into a quarantine hotel for 3 days at your expense, $1,500, and then another 11 days quarantine somewhere else. If you drive in,
wait a second. Let me stop you. Chuck, you spent $1,500 for 3 days. Billy, how much would you spend for 3 days in a hotel?
It depends on the services attached to it.
So let's talk about how much would you spend? Maybe $15?
Me?
No.
Kidding me?
I didn't. In my defense, though, I avoided the $1,500 quarantine hotel because the rules state if you cross by land, you don't have to go into the hotel. So I flew to Syracuse. My youngest son, Nick, goes to Syracuse. He drove me to Buffalo. I got in a cab with a guy named Sal, and he was in essential service. So he drove me across the bridge to a Tim Hortons, and my buddy picked me up. So I avoided quarantine hotel. I said, Sal, how much is it for the? It's literally across the bridge. He said it's $89. I said, Sal, we're going 200 yards. He said, you're my first ride in 4 months. I said, okay, $89.
Wow.
So.
But that's so inconsistent, though. So you can drive in with no quarantine, you fly in, you're quarantined.
Let me tell you. Go ahead.
You when you drive in, you still need to do the 14 days, but you can do it. You don't have to go to the hotel. You can do it in a house or an apartment or something else. It's because there's 117 ways to get in by land and 4 ways to get in by air. It makes no sense. You're right, Billy. But I as exciting and fun as quarantine hotel sounds, I didn't want to do it. So.
Well, next week we're going to have an entrepreneur on named Matt Biggins. But you talk about entrepreneurs, Tim Horton. What a success story he was. And in Canada, Tim Hortons are everywhere. Tim Hortons are the equivalent of Starbucks, maybe even bigger. And why don't you tell us a little about who Tim Horton was, Chuck?
Well, Tim Horton, it's funny because most people are not aware that he was a Hall of Fame defenseman who played for Toronto and he played for the Buffalo Sabres. He was extraordinarily talented. And there's a story that goes, a reporter once asked Gordie Howe, are you the strongest guy in the NHL? And he said, you mean after Tim Horton? Because Tim Horton was so powerful. I was actually listening to somebody the other day saying he would relax with just curling 100-pound dumbbells, just watching TV, curling 100-pound dumbbells. A really, really powerful, dominating defenseman. Didn't score a ton. He was, I think, a second-team All-Star many, many times. There were only a handful of Tim Hortons when he tragically died in a car accident. And as I understand it, his wife was the steward of turning it from 3 or 4 donut shops down sort of in the Toronto, St. Catharines, Niagara Falls region to, I cannot even guess. There must be, I think there are 18, the town I'm from, Guelph, I think there are 18 Tim Hortons. And far more ubiquitous than Starbucks. I mean, they're per capita, it's ridiculous.
And Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, those 3 coffee shops dominate the coffee market.
Yeah, a double and a Dutchie. A Dutchie is a donut riddled with raisins, and double is 2 creams, 2 sugars. And double and a Dutchie is, I mean, some people say that like 15 minutes after death. They've been saying it so often for 7 years.
Derek, how many outlets did you say they have? 4,000?
4,000 in Canada.
In Canada alone.
Yeah, it's Timmy's. It's Timmy Ho's. It's
Timmy Ho's, huh?
Beautiful place that I've only been to Tim Hortons probably 15 or 20,000 times.
Let me tell Chuck, Billy, what's a Chuck Ho?
Chuck Wow.
Chuck Wow.
Yeah. No, I mean, before you came on, your name Chuck. I said, the massage parlors in Thailand when I was in Vietnam, when you went for a massage parlor, if you wanted a happy ending, she said, I'll Chuck Wow Dewey? You want to get jerked off too? Chuck Wow means getting masturbated. Thai. Chuck Wow. So I mean, it just sprung a memory, Chuck. No reflection on you, pal.
No. In my experience with women, it's always been Chuck, not Wow.
Like Billy said, who are you going to please with that?
Yeah, me. I don't know, me.
What's the old joke when the guy says after sex was a good for you, and she says that wasn't good for anyone?
I got to ask you a question. You're the grandson of a newspaper guy, is that right? Am I right there?
Yep.
And that's what really was your impetus into writing to begin with? When did you know you could write? When did you first know you could write it? Because it takes a lot of balls to do what you did and what Frank did. Frankly, to go from advertising to a whole new career, I mean, that takes a lot of cubes. How did you know?
Well, first, you're very kind. I'm still not sure I know. I do know that when I went to Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, and I read early on when I was there, I read the newspaper, and it was The Cord. I'm not sure what the hell that means. But it occurred to me that I could write a column, a very tasteful column called "What's Up, Chuck."
What's up, Chuck? Wow.
I thought if I write a humorous column every week, I don't know, see what happens. And at that time, Billy, I had a very positive response. And if you go back and read the articles, they are sophomoric and they're not great. But at that time, I said, I think I can write funny stuff. And then I got into advertising, and everything I wrote, it could be a crematorium, and I would try and write funny stuff. I always wanted to write funny stuff. And it was probably between the column and the ad agency, I thought, I think I can do this. And then my brother and I sort of had let's do this for 2 years, and if nothing happens, we just go back to Canada and do something else. But very quickly at Full House, I realized I'm an extraordinarily lucky man, because I realized that I was doing something that I might have been sort of designed to do. I have no other skills, none. And but when I started comedy writing at Full House, I said, "Oh, I think I know how to."
You knew I can do this. I was
and my mom and dad had great senses of humor. They weren't hilarious people, but I don't think I've ever met two people that enjoyed laughing more. And as a kid, there's nothing better than sort of making your mom and dad laugh. And the more that I made them laugh, the more I kind of wanted to make them laugh. And then at school, by the end of grade 8, and I'm not making this up, it was Mrs. Nicholson's class. I was, I think, indeed the class clown. By the end of grade 8, my desk was in the hall. They put it by the door. I could see Mrs. Nicholson on the blackboard, but I wasn't allowed to interact with the other kids because it was just constant blabbity, blabbity. And I don't know if I knew I could write, but I at that time, it did seem to me that I could sort of kind of make people.
Do you know what George Lopez's nickname for you was?
No.
Shecky Tatham. Because you were always really sharp with the quips. And
I've had many worse nicknames. I still remember the ball that Rod Carew gave me, Frank, because you had me write a joke or two for Rod, and it said, "Your job is a joke." And I said, "That's very clever." One of the greatest hitters of all time, and the man's also witty. So,
that's great. I wonder, how was it to work in a room after you had written for newspapers? Like, I know that I never could write in a room because I could write narrative, and I write columns and now 3 books with Billy, but I couldn't see myself putting up with rewrite after rewrite after rewrite from other people picking my work apart. So, 10 people picking your work apart. I mean, how was that like for you? How did you adjust to that? How's your ego adjust to that?
Well, I would say this. Everybody assumes what they write is going to be fantastic. And then you see other people pick it apart and you get annoyed, and then you realize it's better.
Yeah.
When you start to realize it's better. And also, when you start to realize, I dare say, you're making their stuff better. And you get into that mindset where it's okay if they pull my stuff apart. I'm going to pull their stuff apart, and we're going to come out with something better. I've worked with writers who have had real problems with the collaborative process. And to your point, Frank, I understand completely. It is a psychology that you give yourself over to the room, and you say. The other thing is you give yourself over to almost constant rejection, because if you pitch 100 things in a day, 2 or 3 might land.
Right.
And you can't. I've seen writers withdraw. Oh, I'm not getting stuff in. I'm not going to talk. And I remember I had a situation on a show with a showrunner who said to me, "You're going to have to be quiet more." It was a news show, and they brought me as a consultant because the show wasn't doing particularly well. And he said, "You're going to have to be quiet." And I said, "Are you kidding me? That is exactly the last thing I was hired to do, was to be quiet." And the show was canceled a week or 2 later. And I hope I'm not an egomaniac, but if there's one thing I know, they're not paying me to be quiet. They're paying me to read what someone else has written and continue to try to improve it
and try to make it better. I always regaled at the writing process when we got a script that was actually absolutely horrible. The first draft was absolutely horrible. The second draft was absolutely horrible. But this guy or gal would get credit for writing the script.
Yes.
And only thing that remained was fade in and fade out. And then on show night, when the warm-up guy introduced the writer of tonight's episode, and here's the writer of tonight's episode, Joe Smith, and Joe Smith takes a bow. I say, how the fuck do you have the balls to take a bow for that?
Yeah.
I know. It's funny because I'll say this. There are times when you take a bow and you've written crap, and there are other times when you helped rewrite this other person's thing, and you should be out there, bowing. It comes with the territory. You have to be able to just put your ego aside. You need a big ego to pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch. I'm going to keep pitching ideas. I'm going to keep pitching jokes. I'm going to keep pitching things for these characters. You need a big ego for that. But you also need to be almost impervious to how you're perceived. I was on a show called Back to You on Fox. Kelsey Grammer, Patty Heaton, Ty Burrell, Josh Gad, Fred Willard. I mean, it was an unbelievable cast and didn't go very long, I think in part because it was on Fox. It should have been on CBS. Anyway, as far as having a thick skin and putting up with stuff, Kelsey had a joke in front of the 300 people on tape night that didn't work. So I ran out and I whispered another joke to him, and they did the scene, and he did my joke, dead silence. And Kelsey Grammer looks over at me in front of 300 people and goes, "Telephone!" And I thought, okay, what can I do with this situation? And I took a bow and I came out and took a bow and got a nice round of applause because, sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. But I was dying laughing. I thought, this guy, my career, I have a career where if I screw up, my name is announced to 300 people who can pelt me with rocks and garbage, and I'm okay with it. So
I think the analogy, when you're talking about being able to put your ego in check and realize that a collaborative effort makes it better, I always use the analogy, the baby's born. Now, it's about the baby. It ain't about you anymore. You're out of the picture. All you did was show up for the creation. That's done. Now the baby's growing. Let's leave it up to go. Let's make the baby as good as we can make it. So
yeah, and Billy, if we make the baby as good as we can make it, we might have a job. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's such a tenuous thing. If the show's a piece of crap, we can cancel. I'm walking home with a box of 3-hole punches.
Let me ask you a question, Chuck. Speaking of scripts, how many scripts do you think you have actually written? Or
I bet you, I have a written by credit on probably 100 episodes.
And how many of those are you getting residuals on?
Probably. It's funny. I've got some yesterday. I don't want to brag.
24 cents?
No, $180.04 right there. Rest of development. I get residuals for a lot. I'm an extraordinarily lucky guy because I'm on shows that went into syndication and are still being run around the world. So probably half a dozen shows. How I Met Your Mother is it's shown on Pluto. It's so popular everywhere. And Full House, although these many years later, still the occasional.
Joel Zwick directed a lot of
what a sweetheart
Full Houses.
Guy. What a sweetheart.
He's a great guy, and he's got getting residuals from so many shows. He doesn't even have to show up.
Is that the jackpot, you guys? Is that the jackpot with writing residuals?
It is the jackpot for residuals, for sure.
Yeah.
And you'll find on United States of Al, you've never seen as many writers credited on scripts as you're going to see on United States of Al.
Yes.
Because Chuck Lorre rightfully makes his own rules. So if Warner Brothers had a rule that you couldn't have more than 3 people on a script, in the past, when I worked there the first time, now you look at the United States of Al, and there's maybe 8 writers on a script.
Yeah. I know. It's a very collaborative process, and we have Afghan consultants on the show as well, whose input is extraordinarily essential. And I think between, old writers like me and consultants and everything else, I'm thrilled I'm thrilled to be back at Warner Brothers. I'm thrilled to be on a great show with lovely, talented people. The written by credit, written by gives you the mother load. If it's story by, teleplay by, it kind of gets split up. But I think, on Arrested Development, everything was gang written. It was, nobody was sent off to write a script. It was all written in the room, and the writers were,
divided the story.
Yeah, and it was out of a hat. It was literally names out of a hat. And whose turn is it? Because we were, as I say, we had to have a script by Monday morning. The scripts had to be about 33, 34, 35 pages. And I'm not exaggerating. Sunday night at midnight, the goddamn script was always 70 pages. And so we had 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours to cut it in half. And we would take the greatest hits. If we needed to fill in some story stuff, Ron Howard as the narrator was great. So instead of that big scene we wrote about the car chase, Ron would say, and then there was a car chase. And it would,
right.
Save a lot of time, save a lot of money, and we would stagger to our cars at, which was tested. By the way, the cast of Arrested Development was getting pages. It was like, here, we're doing this scene in 8 minutes. Jeffrey Tambor looking through us, okay, unbelievably talented people. And it all came from Mitch and Jimmy Vallely. Jimmy's an old buddy of mine, one of the funniest men on the planet. And being a part of a small part of Arrested Development. I was a small part of that. We were looking for a name for the Scott Baio character. And I said Bob Blah Blah. And dead silence. And about 5 minutes later, Mitch said, what was that? So I wrote on the board, BOBLOBLAW, Bob Blah Blah. And Jimmy Vallely laughed, said, Bob Blah Blah, 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 blah. And that was the name of the character. And in the TV commercial where Bob couldn't speak Spanish, I believe the Chiron said, Bob Blah Blah no habla. And he had a law blog, so he had Bob Blah Blah, Bob Blah 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 Blah. But I was just thrilled to be a very, 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 very small part of that, the genius of that show.
My late, very good friend Chris Thompson, who was a genius, said that Jim Vallely was the funniest man he'd ever worked with.
Yeah, Jimmy is tireless. Jimmy is hilarious. Jimmy just gets it. Jimmy doesn't. You don't see Jimmy ever backpedal from I don't know, how do we make that funny? Oh, no. He goes in. He just goes right in to make it funny. And I've worked with Jimmy on many, many different things. And if you go into the room and Jimmy's there, it's going to be funny. He's going to be tireless. He's going to push you, and you're going to push him. And we're there 4 a.m, just yelling jokes at each other. And it's a real phenomenon. I am such a lucky guy to have spent time with such talented, funny people, and to be a small part of some of these really extraordinary shows. I'm an extraordinarily lucky guy.
On your cast, who would you say are the 2 or 3 your favorite actors or actresses to work with?
That's tough. That is Frank. Come on. I know that. Boy, oh boy. I loved working with, Ty Burrell. Ty Burrell is a genius, and he's the nicest man I've ever met. I know that our friend Brooke Shields drove that show. She drove Suddenly Susan. And she was very, very, very talented, and she was an extraordinarily nice person. And she was always involved in every part of that show. I ran into Brooke 10 years afterwards in New York. Hey, Chuck. A really a consummate professional.
Yeah,
lovely.
Just a quick aside for Brooke. In 2018, when I was doing a reboot of Murphy Brown in New York, we called on Brooke to come in and guest star. And she was just as terrific as then. And she ultimately wrote the foreword to If These Lips Could Talk for Billy and I. She wrote the foreword to that. She's an incredibly gracious person.
She is a delight. I don't think you can beat Will Arnett and Jason Bateman. I mean, those guys, they're just instinctively spectacular and lovely, lovely people.
Yeah,
And Will is a Leafs fan, despite the fact that he's a Leafs fan. But I'm glossing over some really incredible people like Neil Patrick Harris. Kobe Smulders on How I Met Your Mother is so beautiful and so funny and so great to work with. And look at Eric Stone Street on Modern Family.
Yep.
I mean, this guy was unbelievable. He can do anything, and he's a really nice guy and a degenerate sports fan. A great guy to
Degenerate sports fan.
Off the record, Chuck. Our new book is out, Lamar's Gamble, and it's the story of the AFL NFL merger.
Right.
Can you send me Eric Stone Street's home address so I can
Sure.
off the record so we can send him? He's a big Kansas City Chiefs fan.
He's the biggest. K-State.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
the story should interest him. The Lamar Hunt story.
Yeah, I like it. It's the story of Lamar Hunt's involvement in the merger.
And the period there, the 60s, that it couldn't have really happened if it wasn't for that time period, the tumultuous period of the 60s. So
Yeah, we talked about that at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, but I'd like to send Eric a copy. I'll send Eric a copy of my book, and I'll say Chuck said.
Oh yeah. He big Chiefs fan, and of course, giant Royals fan. But Bunker Hunt and Lamar Hunt and those guys. I mean, that time it was a little before my time, but I was always fascinated with. My favorite team is the Vikings because as a Canadian, I had to pick a team, and I was between the Lions and the Bills. So I was between shit and I say with all due respect, more shit. It was the Lions at that time was Lem Barney and OJ played for the Bills when I was a kid, but the Vikings kept going to the Super Bowl, and I remember thinking as a little kid, they're going to win it someday, and I was wrong. But
the Bud Grant era, huh?
Okay, so now let's flip the coin. Let's flip the coin, Chuck. Who would you not want to work with again on a bet? What actor would you turn down a show with if he or she was the star?
You know what? I will give you an extraordinarily predictable answer. I have never, ever, ever had a particularly bad time with any actor. So I can't say, and I'm not just making that up.
And you worked with Kathy Griffin.
And I'd work with her again tomorrow.
I would work with her on a nickel, but our jobs were different.
Yeah, well, your point is well made, Frank. Your point is well made. All I have to do is write the stuff, watch. I never directed. I never line produced. I never had to manage a stage. I never had to manage a budget. I never had to, I don't know, put them in a dirigible. It's too expensive. Okay, put them in a chair. Susie Greenberg, a wonderful, wonderful woman, Canadian, produced How I Met Your Mother, and she would lean into the writers' room with things like, I don't know about a giraffe, and then she'd leave because she'd read some pages, But I can't think of an. I know I can think of some writers I might not want to work with again, but I every time I went down to the stage, because when the shit hit the fan, I was usually the co-executive producer. I wasn't like the showrunner. So when the shit hit the fan, I'd basically say, "Where's the golf cart?" And I would go back and eat cookies until the dust settled.
Yes, I'm working with Susie now on the pilot of Night Court.
Oh my God! It's really? Oh my God! Yep. Give her a mooch. Give her a She's now.
And it's Night Court's being directed by Pam Fryman, who directed almost all of the How I Met Your Mothers.
Pam Fryman is not only supremely talented, and as we all know, one of the nicest people in the world. She didn't put up with any bullshit. And she's a lovely, sweet woman. But you knew on her when you're on Pam's stage, no bad behavior. And if she's got a scene or a sequence or some dialogue that doesn't work, she has the most professional way of letting you know it's crap, and you feel like you owe it to her to race back to the office and write something really, really good, because she's just really the best. And I when you see
we may have Pam as a guest in the future.
Oh my God, she must have incredible stories. Unless I'm mistaken, her father was in the clothing business in New York, and my wife's father was a banker in the clothing business in New York. He knew Ralph Lipschitz before he was Ralph Lauren, and Pam's dad and my father-in-law, I think, used to run around together in New York back in the day, when Tommy Hilfiger was still a little kid. But really, Pam and Susie are two extraordinary people.
Yes, they are, for sure. That gives me a good segue into Joanne Tatham. How's your wife?
She's good. She's good. She is a jazz singer who has not been doing much jazz singing because of the pandemic. And we are very much aware that her father unfortunately passed away during the pandemic, and that was tricky.
He obviously done a wounds to the head.
There she is. Her father passed away during the pandemic, the early part, which is extraordinarily unfortunate, because there couldn't be a proper funeral, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she's
awful.
A good kid. She's
a great singer. She's really magnificent. And you talk about punching out of your class. How did you ever get Joanne to agree to marry you?
Just barefaced lies, Frank. Just lying. I think she thought I ran a diamond mine or something. I do know that early on, she said she sang. And she was Light Opera of Manhattan, Hart School of Music, plays in the park. She has an encyclopedic knowledge of musical theater, but she loves singing jazz. Anyway, early on, she said, "You want to come to Mass with me in New York?" And we went over to...
and the answer was no, but you said yes.
Well, when you're courting, yes. Would you like to dig a latrine for me? I'm sure I'll dig a latrine. But we went to Mass, and afterwards, the woman directly in front of us turned around and said to my wife, "You have your voice is so gorgeous." And she looked at me and said, "Not so loud." But, early on, Joanne said, because she was in public relations, working for Ogilvy and Mather on Park Avenue, and she had numerous interesting clients. But early on, she said, in our courtship, I didn't know that well. She said, "Do you like Blackbush?" And I went, "It's an Irish whiskey." "Oh, it's an Irish whiskey." But we went up at one point we went up to her apartment on the Upper West Side, tiny little studio, and there were cases of Irish whiskey, and she also represented some chocolatiers. So there was chocolate and there was Irish whiskey, and I said, "Is there a priest in the building?" Because I unlimited access to Irish whiskey and chocolate. There's no reason that this couldn't work.
That was the basis of a beautiful relationship.
It was really, and married in New York City in May of 1993, and we get back to New York a lot. We get back to the Upper West Side. I was there. Joanne and I were there a week ago, and I can confirm that unlike Toronto, New York is
booming.
Back.
It's back.
The restaurants are full, the bars are full, Central Park is full.
And you've got two boys?
Yes, Trev, fingers crossed, Trev is waitlisted at UC San Diego and doing extraordinarily well. And Nicky is at Syracuse. He will be a senior this year. He's the fraternity Delta Kappa Epsilon pledge chairman. So there could be some arrests in the future. But Joanne got her master's at Syracuse. My sister lives in Kingston, Ontario, 2 hours north of Syracuse. It's an hour from Cooperstown, so we've been there with some frequency. And what's kind of fun about Syracuse is when you're on the campus, it just feels like sports.
Yeah.
Like you just know, between.
It feels like Ernie Davis and Floyd Little.
Oh yeah,
too, right?
Jim Brown. Yeah.
And Jimmy Brown and the dome and of course Syracuse football hasn't been great of recent, but it's a wonderful school. And then just a fairly straight shot to Sal in Buffalo with the $89 It was $89 to go 100 yards across a bridge. I mean, what kind of a world do we live in? And they give you a nose swab halfway across the bridge.
Wait a second, Chuck. Just pause for a second.
Sure.
You just made $89.
Yes. Thank you, Writers Guild. Well, it's funny because the residual checks come in green envelopes, and sort of yay by yay. And there's some insurance company in town that sends out their stuff in the same color of envelope, and they should be murdered because you go to the mailbox and agree. Oh my God, this is just insurance. It should have a thing on it saying there's no money in here. But every time I get a green envelope, I think
rejoice.
You paint something, you sell it, you don't get a check 10 years later because you painted it. This is the best. This is the most wonderful
home run. It's got to be economically the big home run for you guys.
Thank you for unions.
Thank
you for unions.
Yep.
Let's wrap this up, Chuck. You've been a great guest. Derek, do you have any questions for Chuck?
Yes. Hey, Chuck.
Hey, buddy.
Hey. So, what sort of stuff do you do up in Canada? Any kind of fun stuff like fishing, hunting, ski?
It's funny because I play hockey down here. When I get up there, it's basically just to see relatives, enjoy Molson Canadian,
right?
Enjoy Sleeman's Lager. And I actually like to go to the places where I'm from, and to be a little bit sentimental, because I was born in Listowel. We moved to Kitchener-Waterloo for a couple of years. We moved to London, Ontario for a couple of years, and then to Guelph. And it was interesting, a couple times ago, I wanted to see the house I lived in London. So I'll make this story as quick as I can. I drove down to London, Ontario, parked outside, took a couple of pictures, and I noticed a woman looking at me. And she wasn't very happy. And I was like, I'm just taking a couple of pictures of a house where I was raised. So I drove back. Long story short, the next day, the RCMP had me on the phone because that's where a detective lives. And a guy got out of prison a couple of weeks ago who said he was going to murder him. And they thought I was the guy going to murder him. And I said, Google me. I'm harmless. I'm a comedy writer, But,
RCMC was Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yes. The Mounties were after,
and it wasn't Dudley Do-Right.
No, it was. Well, the funny thing was, then they someone from the Ontario Provincial Police called, and she said, "We googled you, everything's fine." Long beat. My daughter wants to be an actress. Can she come?
Of course.
I spent an hour with her. Now, you guys, I'm sure you were really interested in how I looked when I was 4. There it is.
Can you hold it up again, Chuck?
That was in the offices. That was in the offices of the Listowel Banner newspaper.
Wow, cute.
Where Dad. The suspenders I remember were flannel.
Do you still have those? Do you still have
What's
those?
that?
Do you still have those suspenders?
I don't know if I have the suspenders. It looks like I might still have the haircut. Had I enlisted in the Marine Corps? I know that Dad enjoyed saving $1 or $2, and that was the work of George Tatham. That hairdo. That was before. That was when I could actually see, and before I had to wear the full hobbles.
Well, your dad gave you haircuts. My dad gave me haircuts. Billy's dad, I don't think would let him near a pair of scissors.
I would let my dad near a pair of scissors. You kidding me? Half the time he couldn't walk to the kitchen table. It was loaded. I got to ask you a question because I'd be amiss if I didn't pick your brain because you are obviously a super successful writer and a real pro. And you mentioned something before. You said it's so much easier to write for characters that are well-defined. If a character's well-defined, and Dickens had a way of saying his characters, which were always obviously unforgettable. He said, give your character a wart at the very end of his nose. Make him stand out. How do you make your character stand out? Like,
boy, that is a good question. I think if you can find something it's a little bit like a caricaturist. If somebody, to your point, if somebody's ears are a little bigger than they should be, the caricaturist will make them very big, and it'll be memorable. I know that Frasier was an accessory to Cheers, but he was a character that was very interesting because he was the brightest guy in the room and liked being the brightest guy in the room, but he was a bit of an oddball. And then when they did the show Frasier, they very wisely said, let's move him from from the sort of the oddball into the middle and make someone who's more of an oddball, who's a heightened Fraser.
Wow.
And they gave him his brother. The other thing to do is to take a Jason Bateman. If you take a Jason Bateman and put him in the middle of Arrested Development as the guy that goes, or Mary Tyler Moore as the character that goes, is everyone around me completely bananas? Then the audience can say, I relate to this.
Or Brooke Shields in Suddenly Susan.
Brooke Shields in Susan. There's a character that like me is going, oh, this is chaos. And that character is flawed. That character can get lots of laughs, but that character means the other ones can be even more crazy.
Right.
And I think if you can ground the show somehow in the middle, these other characters, whether it's Ted Knight or Will Arnett, or whomever, can be bananas. And then you come up with, Will Arnett as a magician in Arrested Development. I don't know where Mitch came up with that, but it was hilarious. And I think when you tap into insecurities as well, people will watch a show. They might not be conscious that they're insecure, but when they see characters with insecurities, they gravitate to them. If a character has too much bravado, let's knock him down. Speaking of Ted Knight on Mary Tyler Moore, knock him down. Just keep on knocking, even if he doesn't know he's being knocked down. We were talking just the other day about Archie Bunker's character. There were people who didn't know he was wrong. There were people who watched All in the Family because they kind of agreed with the guy, right? But most people watched that show in large part to see him get knocked down. And
it's great.
A lot of the comedy that we do is setting up characters to knock them down, and it's very satisfying.
And really, toward that point, when you come into a show in the first year, the first 6 or 8 episodes are really hard because you really are not writing toward anybody's point of view or any actor's voice. After 6 to 8 episodes, you start writing toward the actor's voice, and then it gets better.
Yes, it gets better. And you also, as you know, Frank, there's that little character over there you didn't really think about who's nailing it, and they take off. You might not
like Urkel.
Well, yeah, you might not necessarily get an Urkel or a Fonzie, but you'll get another character. Nestor Carbonell in Suddenly Susan. I don't know the genesis of that character, and now he plays the mayor in the Batman movies. And talk about a nice guy, but he just
the best.
He just blossomed into this hilarious character, and you run back to the office to write for these people. You just run back to write for them, and
because they're so well defined, they are easy to write for. You got a million things in your head to say. Oh, this guy's got to say this. This is
yeah. And I say to young people, because they won't sweat the character, and I say, if you sweat the character, it's easier to write. You're gonna thank me 6 months from now because you sweat this character. This character has mother issues. Why? Let's just explore this character having mother issues. Then you'll come up with ideas about other people's mothers, whether or not they're a mother. Let's meet the mother. Let's not meet, whatever. And it's character. It's all character. And then the other thing was Chris Lloyd had a sign at Modern Family that said endings make stories. And that's not everyone sort of abides by that. But I do know that if I have a destination to get to, it's easier. It's hard to get to it, but it's easier to kind of get there rather than just typing until you collapse. So I kind of do tell writers, before you go on a big long bridge to nowhere, maybe think about the destination.
I got another question too. What show are you watching that it's sort of like obscure that people don't really know about or is not as popular as that you really like?
Boy, that's Derek, that's a tough question because I will admit I do not watch a lot of TV anymore. And I remember, Frank, remember Diane English?
Sure.
She famously said, when asked this question, sort of at the height of her career, she had Murphy Brown, etc. I don't really watch TV. I remember reading that going, you smug so-and-so.
Yeah.
This is buttering your bread and you don't watch it? 30 years later, I like to watch sports, documentaries, and old movies. And we just did enjoy Kaminsky Method. I will admit I watched, Downton Abbey, degenerate. but I don't generally watch comedy, and it's
Yeah,
for me.
you got to be you're too critical.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a real busman's holiday for me. I mean, there's really obviously extraordinary comedy out there, but at the end of the day, if I've done 10 hours of comedy, I'll pour myself a scotch and just relax watching Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
The shoemaker's kids got
Well,
no shoes.
If you want,
Yeah.
if you want to watch a documentary, you can watch Jacksonville Who on YouTube, which is the story of the 1970 Jacksonville University basketball team. It was a great documentary. I really recommend it.
Perfect. The most recent documentary I watched was the one on Hemingway on PBS.
Yeah, that was terrific.
It's a lot like that.
It's a lot like that. Hemingway was a better perimeter shooter than they give him credit for. Yeah, you give me, and this is also sort of goes into the fact that I'm making this documentary about Harold Bauer, the guy that owned the Leafs, because I've always kind of liked documentaries because I learned, and then I still kind of like to learn stuff. So
yeah, it was an interesting exercise for me doing Jacksonville Who, because I need the documentary, obviously, and I had to be passionate about the project. That's why I did it, and I really learned a lot about interviewing. Interviewing technique. I mean, it was crazy how many things I learned and how much of a storyteller I became out of doing that. And I'm going to say to you, get a good editor, because the editor makes the story. The editor will make the story what it is, and just let him go. Let him or her go, and then you can add your flourishes after he or she gets their first cut done.
Yeah, I learned early in my career. I really didn't understand or respect editing. My God, it's crucial. It just makes all the difference. And Sue Fetterman has won some Emmys. I worked with her on How I Met Your Mother. Just assembling a story, what documentary, feature film, sitcom, and Mitch Hurwitz would come back, and he would he'd be gone for a couple hours, and he'd say, I just assembled a joke. I just assembled a joke in editing by over the shoulder voiceover. He remembered a reaction, and when you see it, it looks effortless. You don't realize the amount of expertise and effort that went into it. But
yeah,
editing.
The difference between the two is that in the sitcom, they have a well-defined story and script in hand. In a documentary, you're doing the documentary, but you really don't know what the story is. So you're gonna have to go through transcripts, and somebody's gonna have to say this will be the story that'll come out of this, and then the editor will have to put that together, and that's a yeoman's task.
This afternoon, I'm starting to read transcripts from Daryl Sittler, Wendell Clark, Boris Salming, all the guys, and come up with that. To your point, that narrative spine of the film.
Well, one of the rules of writing is that editing is not cleaning up after the party. Editing is the party.
Well said. That's
the deal.
And it's that old thing where somebody apologized for writing such a long letter because they didn't have time.
Trying to make it shorter. Yeah, that's a terrific line.
Check.
You can spew and spew and spew, but it takes expertise to winnow and shape and focus.
Well, we could spew and spew and spew all afternoon. We're going to let you go because you've been a terrific interview. We've had a great time. Don't forget to send us or me Eric Stonestreet's home address, and send me your phone number, because I still don't have it, even though I asked for it 3 days ago.
Oh, okay, yeah. I thought you might have been one of the guys from the bank. So, yeah.
But
thank you, gentlemen. Good to see you. I'm going to just relax.
All right.
July 1st, Canada Day. Go Blue Jays.
Is that a Molson's cap?
No, it's a Blue Jays hat.
Is that a Molson cap?
There it is. Good look.
Pretty good.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, man. Thanks for the writing advice, too. I'm going to take it to heart. Believe me.
We hope you had fun, Chuck.
I did indeed. Best of luck. Great to see you. See you later.
All right, brother. Peace out.
Bye-bye.
So, it was a good interview, huh?
Great guest. I got a kick out of it. He was talking about the character, and the first thing I I flashed to, because you know me with the history, is the word barbarian. The Romans gave that word barbarian because everybody started talking like ba 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 ba, and that's where it came from. La ba 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 ba. That's funny stuff. But he's amazing, amazing.
Yeah. So again, another interesting character.
Oh yeah, yeah. And his writing advice is really on the money. I mean, define your characters. Define your characters.
Yep.
Easy to write for.
Yeah, there's some gold in that interview regarding writing.
Without a doubt. I mean,
For sure.
I thought that, yeah, that what he was saying about how it's much easier when the characters. Even in our book, when we did the Combustible, one of the reasons we used the names Twiggy and Shifty and
Because you knew them.
Chicklets, because they stand out. Now your character stands out.
And you're writing to a character.
Exactly. And now you're not looking at what was that guy's name again? Mike Schwartz, or like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It stands out.
And
Well-
the other thing, Billy, is you had quite a few teachable moments in this interview where you were, you said a couple things about writing and sparked some great responses from the guests.
Well,
He's smart.
Yeah.
I'm smart. I'm telling you, he's
a real
really
pro. I
smart.
mean, he's
Yeah.
a real
Billy,
pro.
I'm talking about
Talking
Billy.
about you, Billy.
You're really smart.
Yeah.
I am, huh?
Yeah.
I'm not dumb like everybody says. I got passed over, Frank. You went to D. You passed over. I was the older brother.
With that, say goodnight.
Good
Billy.
night. Good night, everybody
Good
out
night,
there.
Derek.
And don't forget, it's out there.
It's out there, Lamar's Gamble. You can pick
Right
up
on it, right
If
on the
These Lips
shelves.
Could Talk.
Right next to If These Leaves Could Talk.
A lot of people that Chuck mentioned are in If These Lips Could Talk. Brooke Shields, Nestor Carbonell, a lot of them. So pick up either or.
A tale. We should have put a fine tale of the AFL merger, because it is a fine tale.
Yeah, but we couldn't fit it on the cover. We go off into the black.
And we should have gave Lamar Hunt a wart right on the end of his nose. All right, good night out
Good
there.
night.
Thank you very much for tuning in.
Next week's guest, actor Joe Regalbuto.
We'll see you next week.